Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Marcus Keller stood on the balcony of his sleek high-rise apartment, looking out over the glittering city below. The lights of the sprawling metropolis twinkled like stars, a technological wonder that masked the rot within. He had worked his entire life to reach this moment, to be on the verge of becoming a political candidate for the upcoming election. Yet tonight, there was a heaviness in his chest that wouldn't go away. Elena, the thought of her gnawed at him. It had been weeks since anyone had heard from her, and that in itself was unusual. Elena Ford was his closest friend, a woman who had always been loud, brash, and fiercely dedicated to fighting the regime. Now she had vanished. All traces of her existence had disappeared from social media, public records, even family photos. When he tried to find any mention of her in the city's official archives, it was as if she had never existed. She just disappeared. She had been erased. Marcus turned away from the cityscape and stepped inside. The walls of his apartment were bare, the only personal touches being a few scattered data pads on the glass table and a half-finished cup of coffee. He paced the room, replaying the conversations he'd had with other activists. Most were too afraid to ask questions. They whispered rumors of people being disappeared, buried by the government, never to be seen again. But Marcus had to know more. Elena wasn't just another victim. She was his link to something greater, something dangerous. And now he feared she had been taken because of their work together. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass of the window, his face illuminated by the city light. A man in his early 30s with sharp features, dark hair, and eyes that had seen too much in too little time. He had to make a decision, one that would take him down a path of no return. Marcus grabbed his jacket and slipped out of the apartment, heading into the depths of the city. The underground club was packed. The thrum of bass reverberated through the walls, masking any conversations that might catch the wrong ear. This was where resistance members met, a safe haven beneath the government's all-seeing eye. The smoky haze in the air made it difficult to see anyone clearly, but Marcus knew who he was looking for. A man with a scar running across his left eye sat in a booth at the back of the club, surrounded by a few familiar faces from the resistance. His name was Jax, a tech genius who had worked for the government, SARD's surveillance department. Before defecting, if anyone knew what had happened to Elena, it was him. Jax looked up as Marcus approached, giving a slight nod. Sure, you've been asking too many questions. He said, voice low. Sorry, that's how people get erased. I'm not here to talk about me, and Marcus replied, sliding into the booth. Pierre, I need to know what happened to Elena. Jack's eyes flickered. With unease, he leaned in, lowering his voice even further. She's not dead, if that's not what you were thinking, but she might as well be told. Marcus Sayers' heart skipped a beat. The government has a program, Jax continued, something they don't advertise, obviously. Don't kill dissidents anymore. It's too messy, too obvious. Instead, they erase them, wipe their records, their identities, everything. And they lock them up in secret prisons. That way, it sounded like they never existed. No body, no funeral, no trail to follow. Marcus clenched his fists under the table. Harry, where are these prisons? Jax shook his head. That's the thing. I don't know. It's signing off. But I've heard whispers people like Elena, they were not dead. They were just gone tucked away where no one will ever find them. How do we find her? Marcus Sal's voice was sharp, urgent. Jax leaned back, eyeing Marcus warily. See, you don't, no one in that ever come back from being erased. Not that anyone saw die. Rifian, trying calm, Marcus said firmly. A long silence followed as Jax studied him. Finally, the tech expert sighed and pulled out a small data chip from his jacket pocket. This is the only lead I've got. It's not much, but it's as a start. It's also a fragment of code from the government system, something I intercepted before I left. I think it's us connected to the erasure program, but I haven't been able to crack it. You might have better luck. Marcus took the chip, his mind racing. This was it, a chance to get inside, to find out where they had taken Elena and the others. He rose to leave, but Jax grabbed his arm. Be careful, Yates warned, his voice heavy with meaning. Once you start down this road, there's no coming back. Back at his apartment, Marcus plugged the data chip into his terminal, his hands shaking with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. The screen flashed to life, displaying lines of code, encrypted and unreadable to the untrained eye. But Marcus wasn't trying untrained. He had spent years working in tech before diving into politics. And if there was one thing he could do, it was break into system. Hours passed as he worked decoding the fragmented data. His mind buzzed with the enormity of what he was trying to uncover. The government says power was absolute. They controlled every aspect of life, from the food people ate to the thoughts they were allowed to think. And now they were erasing people, wiping them from existence without a trace. Finally, the code began to unravel. Hidden within the layers of encryption, Marcus found the name of a facility, a place on the outskirts of the city, listed only by a string of numbers. It wasn't too much, but it was enough. A prison disguised as a government research center. He sat back in his chair, the weight of what he had discovered settling over him. Elena was alive, somewhere inside that facility, along with countless others who had been erased, and now he had a way to reach her. But it wouldn't be easy. The facility was heavily guarded, its location secret for a reason. Marcus knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed help, and he knew just where to find it. The warehouse on the edge of the city was dark, the only light coming from a few dim bulbs hanging from the ceiling. This was where the resistance operated, from a place where the disillusioned and the desperate gathered to plan their rebellion against the regime. Marcus entered the building, his presence drawing the attention of a few armed guards. One of them, a woman with short cropped hair and a steely expression, stepped forward. Mighty Rakeller, right? A politician. I'm not here as a politician, Marcus said. I am here because I need your help. The woman smirked, crossing her arms. Help with what? Running another campaign? We were not in the business of elections down here. I need to break into a government facility, Marcus said, his voice steady. A prison. They've taken my friends, my family. I have proof. Her smirk faded, replaced by a look of intrigue. Fireproof truth. Marcus held up the data chip. It's sent all here. Because I'll here program the secret prison. They were wiping people from existence, and I know where one of the prisons is. The woman studied him for a moment before nodding. Come with me. She led him to a room at the back of the warehouse, where a group of resistance members were gathered around a table covered in blueprints and surveillance photos. At the head of the table sat a man with graying hair and sharp eyes, Vince, the leader of the resistance. Marcus laid the data chip on the table. I have information on a facility where the government is holding erased people. I need your help to break in. Vince glanced at the chip, then back at Marcus. And why should we trust you? You've been part of the system, Keller. You've spent your life working within it. Not anymore, Marcus replied. Ye not after what they've done to the people I care about. Vince stared at him for a long moment before nodding. We'll help you, but this isn't going to be easy. That facility is guarded by some of the best security the regime has to offer. If we were going in, we need to be prepared. The plan was set in motion quickly. The resistance had been gathering information on government facilities for years, and Marcus Silad was the missing piece they needed. The facility was located in an isolated part of the city, disguised as a research center. It was surrounded by layers of security cameras, guards, and encrypted access points, but the resistance had ways of getting around those obstacles. Marcus spent the night preparing, his mind focused on what was to come. This was no longer just about exposing the regime, it was personal. Elena was alive, and he would do whatever it took to get her back. But even as he prepared, doubt gnawed at the edges of his thought. What if they were too late? What if Elena and the others were already lost? Broken by the system that had erased them. There was no room for hesitation now. Tomorrow they would strike. The morning arrived with a thick fog rolling over the city, shrouding everything in a pale gray. It was the perfect cover for what they were about to do. Marcus met the resistance members outside the warehouse, the tension in the air palpable. Armed with the blueprints Vince had provided, they prepared to breach the facility. Each of them wore tactical gear designed to avoid detection by the security systems, and they moved with quiet precision, their faces set with grim determination. As they approached the outskirts of the city, Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. Everything had led to this moment. The facility loomed ahead, a nondescript building surrounded by high fences and security towers. It looked like any other government structure, its bland exterior hiding the horrors within. Marcus' thoughts kept drifting to Elena. Was she inside right now, locked away in some dark cell? Would she even recognize him after all this time? He pushed the doubts aside. There was no room for hesitation. Vince motioned to the others, signaling them to fan out. The resistance members moved quickly, disabling the external security systems with expert precision. The plan was to avoid direct confrontation for as long as possible. They needed to get inside, retrieve the data on the erased prisoners, and find Elena. If they were caught too early, they wouldn't stand a chance. Marcus followed closely behind Vince and the others as they approached the perimeter fence. The security cameras had been neutralized, and they cut through the fence with laser cutters, slipping through the gap silently. The cold morning air stung Marcus's face, but he ignored it, his focus razor sharp. They reached the side of the building, moving to the maintenance door. Vince held up a small device, overriding the electronic lock. With a soft click, the door swung open, and they slipped inside. The interior of the facility was sterile, clinical, with white walls and harsh fluorescent light. It felt more like a hospital than a prison, but Marcus knew better. They moved through the corridors, keeping low and avoiding the few security guards they encountered. Vince's intel had been good. The facility was lightly staffed, its true nature hidden even from most government workers. They reached a central control room, where they could access the prison internal system. Vince motioned for Marcus to follow him inside, while the others stood guard outside. The room was filled with monitors displaying security feeds and rows of terminals. Vince sat down at one of the terminals, quickly typing commands into the system. "This should give us access to the prisoner database," Vince ordered, his eyes scanning the screen. Marcus stood over his shoulder, watching as lines of code scrolled across the terminal. His hands were shaking, his mind racing. This was it. If they found Elena sane in the system, they could find where she was being held. "This," Vince said, pointing to the screen, "weary in." Marcus leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. A list of names appeared on the screen, each one marked with a status code. Most were labeled erased people who had been wiped from public records and sent to this facility. Marcus's heart pounded as he scrolled through the list, searching for the name he feared and hoped to see. Then he found it. Elena Ford, status erased. Location, cell block. "She's right here," Marcus whispered, his voice tight with emotion. Vince nodded. "We've got her location now. We just have to get her out." They downloaded the list of names onto a data chip, securing the evidence they needed to expose the government Sciencefiction program. But Marcus' mind was focused on one thing: getting to Elena. They moved swiftly through the facility, heading for cell block. The corridors grew darker as they descended into the lower levels of the building, the sterile white walls replaced by cold concrete. The atmosphere shifted, becoming oppressive, suffocating. This was where the erased were kept, locked away from the world above. As they approached the cell block, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Marcus froze, signaling to Vince and the others. A pair of guards appeared around the corner, their eyes scanning the hallway. There was no time to hide before the guards could react. Vince and one of the resistance members leapt forward, taking them down silently. The guards crumpled to the ground unconscious. "Let's move," Vince whispered, motioning them forward. They reached the door to cell block B, and Marcus's stomach churned with anticipation. Vince bypassed the lock and the door slid open with a hit. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of damp concrete and despair. The cells lined the walls, each one holding a prisoner who had been erased from existence. Men and women sat in silence, their eyes hollow, their spirits broken. Marcus's eyes scanned the cells, searching for her. Then in the far corner, he saw her. Elena. She sat in the back of the cell, her head down, her dark hair tangled and unkempt. She looked smaller than he remembered, thinner, worn down by months of captivity. Marcus' heart ached as he stepped forward, gripping the bars of her cell. "Elena," he whispered. She didn't move at first, then slowly she lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, there was no recognition in her gaze, as if the person she had been had faded away, but then slowly, a spark of life flickered in her eye. Marcus, her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "It's me," said his voice thick with emotion. "Dear, I am here to get you out." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry instead. She rose to her feet, her movements slow and shaky. Marcus felt a surge of relief as he watched her, knowing that despite everything, she was still alive, still fighting. Vince quickly unlocked the cell door, and Marcus stepped inside, pulling Elena into his arms. She felt fragile, like she might break at any moment, but she clung to him, holding on, as if her life depended on it. "We need to move," Vince said, his voice cutting through the moment. And now, Marcus nodded, pulling Elena with him as they hurried back toward the exit. The resistance members covered their retreat, taking down any guards they encountered. Alarms began to blare throughout the facility, the sound reverberating off the concrete walls. Their cover was blown. They burst out into the open air, the fog still clinging to the city like a blanket. Resistance vehicles waited nearby, their engines idling. Marcus helped Elena into one of the vehicles as the others piled in. The doors slammed shut, and the vehicle roared to life, speeding away from the facility. As they drove through the empty streets, Marcus sat next to Elena, his hand gripping hers tightly. She was safe for now, but the fight was far from over. The data chip they had stolen was more than just a list of names. It was a smoking gun, evidence that the government had been systematically erasing its opposition and imprisoning them in secret facilities. Marcus knew that with this information, they could blow the lid off the entire erasure program, but that also meant they would become the government's top target. They regrouped at the warehouse, where Vince began analyzing the data. The resistance was already working on a plan to leak the information to the public, but it wouldn't truly be easy. The government controlled the media, the networks, everything. They needed to find a way to get the truth out, to show the world what was really happening. Elena sat beside Marcus, silent but alert. Her strength was returning, but he could see the toll her captivity had taken on her. There was a hardness in her now, a sharp edge that hadn't already been there before. She had been through hell, and though she was free, she wasn't the same person she had been. "Khalil, come after us," Elena said quietly, her voice low. "I know," Marcus replied, "but we can talk." "Stop. No, this is bigger than us." She nodded, her eyes dark and focused. "We expose them. We bring them down, no matter what it takes." The days that followed were a blur of planning and preparation. The resistance worked tirelessly, coordinating with underground networks and trusted contacts to ensure that when the data was leaked, it would reach every corner of society. The government's grip on the people was strong, but if they could show the world the truth, they could spark a revolution. As the day of the leak approached, Marcus and Elena found themselves standing on the balcony of his apartment, once again looking out over the city. The lights below seemed brighter now, more vivid, as if the world was holding its breath. "Were we really doing this?" Elena said, "Lace soft." "We are," Marcus replied, "and once the truth is out there, there's no going back." She smiled faintly, a flicker of the old Elena shining through. "Real good. I don't think you want to go back." They stood there in silence, watching the city, knowing that everything was about to change. The regime had kept them in the dark for too long, erasing those who dared to stand up. But now the light was about to shine through, and the world would see the truth.